On the Parents' Notebook all this week, Mr. Rogers talks to parents. Hello, this is Bill Cullen with today's edition of the Parents' Notebook. Our show's furnished by Johnson & Johnson, makers of Johnson's Baby Lotion. The thick and rich formula of Johnson's Baby Lotion helps soothe, soften, and protect baby's delicate skin. Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, has been welcoming children to his television neighborhood for almost 30 years. Compared to other children's programs, Mr. Rogers has a low-key approach that allows the children viewing him time to think and reach their own conclusions. We like his no-nonsense, calm way of dealing with children, and we think you will too. So all this week you'll be hearing excerpts from our interview with Mr. Rogers. Things like what you can do when your child asks you a question that makes you rather uncomfortable, and how to handle a 2-year-old who's afraid to take a bath. Not only is Mr. Rogers a child development expert, but as you'll hear, he's someone who genuinely likes and respects children. And he genuinely likes and respects parents, too.
We're very sensitive instruments, we human beings. And I believe exceedingly valuable. And so when I say to the children at the end of the program, you've made this day a special day by just your being you. There's only one person in the whole world like you, and people can like you exactly as you are. That's something to grow toward, to be able to love the people that we know exactly as they are. That's a very tough assignment, but it's the most important assignment in life.
Tomorrow, Mr. Rogers will talk about coping with childhood fears. Today's edition of the Parents' Notebook has been furnished by Johnson & Johnson, makers of Johnson's Baby Lotion. The thick and rich formula of Johnson's Baby Lotion helps soothe, soften, and protect baby's delicate skin. Join us again. On the Parents' Notebook all this week, Mr. Rogers talks to the parents. Hello, this is Bill Cullen with today's edition of the Parents' Notebook. Our show is furnished by Johnson & Johnson, makers of Johnson's Baby Oil. You can do a lot for your baby with a little Johnson's Baby Oil. How does a parent deal with a child's fears? Let's hear what Fred Rogers thinks.
If we were afraid when we were a child of a certain thing that our children are afraid of now, it's very helpful to tell them that. But it's also helpful to tell them that we grew beyond that fear. There were some of us who were very much afraid of dogs, anything that has a wide, open, biting mouth, when we were maybe 3 years old. And if we can remember that and tell our own 3-year-old who might say, you know, I'm afraid of dogs, I think that could be very helpful to them. But then it's also important to add how as we grew, we were able, quite naturally, to get over that fear, because we were able to deal with our own sense that we were going to bite somebody ourselves. Well, most fears come from within, and if we're able to recognize that and realize that a child is usually afraid of something on the outside that reflects what's going on inside of him or her, then we have a much better handle on what happens to be going on in our own homes.
Listen again tomorrow for more of Mr. Rogers. Today's edition of the Parents' Notebook has been furnished by Johnson & Johnson, makers of Johnson's Baby Oil. You can do a lot for your baby with a little Johnson's Baby Oil. This is Bill Cullen. Thank you very much, and join us next time. On the Parents' Notebook all this week, Mr. Rogers talks to parents. Hello, this is Bill Cullen with today's edition of the Parents' Notebook. Our show's furnished by Johnson & Johnson, makers of Johnson's Baby Shampoo. Only Johnson's Baby Shampoo has the unique No More Tears formula. And when we say no more tears, we mean no more tears. Got a 2-year-old who refuses to take a bath? Could be there's a very simple reason for that seemingly unreasonable fear. Let's listen to Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, as he offers a simple solution to help you and your child solve this problem.
There's a song that we sing on the neighborhood that's called You Can Never Go Down the Drain. Many 2-year-olds are very much afraid of being sucked down the bathtub drain or the toilet. When they see all this flush of water, they think, well, maybe that could pull me down too, because they have no concept of size. And so one of the things that we try to deal with in the neighborhood is the fact that while the water and the soap suds can go down the drain, you can never go down the drain. It's very helpful for an adult to tell that to a child. Just the simple thing of taking a child out of the bathtub before you pull the plug. Such a simple thing. And yet it has helped many families with great fears of taking baths.
Yes, it's the simple things that usually work. Tomorrow, Fred Rogers will give us some clues on how to answer those difficult questions that children seem to come up with. Today's edition of the Parents' Notebook has been furnished by Johnson & Johnson, makers of Johnson's Baby Shampoo. When we say no more tears, we mean no more tears. This is Bill Cullen. We thank you and join us next time. On the Parents' Notebook all this week, Mr. Rogers talks to parents. Hello, this is Bill Cullen with today's edition of the Parents' Notebook. Our show's furnished by Johnson & Johnson, makers of Johnson's No More Tangles. No more ouch with Johnson's No More Tangles. Questions. Children are full of questions. Here's Fred Rogers with a way to handle some of your children's questions.
When a child asks you a question, it's often helpful to ask another question in return so that you don't assume that you know exactly what that question's about. For instance, there's an old story about a child who said, "Where did I come from?" And the father mobilized his forces and started to give him the lecture on sex education that he was scared about giving and thinking he'd have to someday. And finally he said, "Is this making any sense to you?" And the child said, "Oh, well, yes, it is, but our neighbors have just come from Schenectady, and I wondered where we came from." And so I think it's so helpful. I mean, it would have been really helpful for that father to say, when the child said, "Where did I come from?" if the father could have said, "Where do you think you came from?" That would have clarified what was on that little boy's mind right at the beginning.
So there you have some very good and simple advice. Don't answer your child's question until you're sure you know what it is that your child wants to know. We'll have more good words from Mr. Rogers tomorrow. Today's edition of the Parents' Notebook has been furnished by Johnson & Johnson, makers of Johnson's No More Tangles. No more ouch with Johnson's No More Tangles. This is Bill Cullen saying thank you and join us again. On the Parents' Notebook all this week, Mr. Rogers talks to parents. Hello, this is Bill Cullen with today's edition of the Parents' Notebook. Our show's furnished by Johnson & Johnson, makers of Johnson's Baby Cornstarch. Extra absorbent Johnson's Baby Cornstarch helps keep baby's skin feeling drier and more comfortable. We asked Mr. Rogers what his one best piece of advice to parents might be. Let's listen to his answer. It's so simple, it just might surprise you.
To try to remember what it was like to be a child and to share that with your own child. I remember a mother who told her little boy on the first day of school how it was when she went the first day of school. She said there were times that I really wanted to come home, but I stuck it out. And I felt bigger after that day was over. That mother's child who shared her own experience from childhood, that child might very easily say, "Well, there were some times when I felt just like you said you did, that I wanted to come home, but I'm glad I stuck it out." We always come back to being as honest as we know how to be with our kids. One of the best things I think that we can offer children is one more honest adult. And any way that we can be honest without terribly threatening to children.
So there you have it, some wonderfully simple and loving views from Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Today's edition of the Parent's Notebook has been furnished by Johnson & Johnson, makers of Johnson's Baby Cornstarch. Extra absorbent Johnson's Baby Cornstarch helps keep baby's skin feeling drier and more comfortable. This is Bill Cullen. Thank you, and join us again.